I sure can, if everyone can hear me, hopefully. We'll get this meeting going. Sorry, my video isn't working, so you'll just have to hear me talk. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming to our meeting. Uh, People who came in person, thank you. And everyone else who are attending online, thank you as well. We are excited that Kathleen Rust is our presenter this month. Kathleen is a PhD candidate who is researching early primate evolution and systematics at the University of Kansas Biodiversity Institute. And Kathleen also has a Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology with high honors, and a Master of Arts in Anthropology from Hunter College City University of New York. Very cool. And she is here to present reading the fossil record and how fossils, oh, yes, how fossils from China reveal the origin and evolutionary history of the last primate in North America before the arrival of humans. So I will talk no more, and Kathleen, please take it away. Thank you.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. I will just take a moment to get so I can share my screen because I've put together a little bit of a presentation. So if you'll just give me a second to do that. Am I able to do that currently?
Oh, yes, please. Absolutely. You just get your stuff going and then you share your screen. Hopefully
There
you're
is share
savvy with that.
screen.
If you're on
It's been a minute
Zoom,
since I've used Zoom,
I
thankfully,
know.
so
There's little
um,
tabs on the bottom there.
there we
Mute,
go.
start video, and share screen. So hopefully that will work.
Wonderful. Let me go
Erin, if I've
ahead.
incorrectly advised her, do jump in.
I
Eric's there.
believe I can. Here we go. Let me see. I'm eager to see if this will work. Give me 1 second. Sorry about that. So you should be seeing just a white screen and then let me see.
Right now we see your computer screen. Perfect. So now it's jumped up to, it looks like your presentation.
Great. Wonderful. So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here this evening. Again, my name is Kathleen Rust, and I am just so excited to be here to share with you some recent research that was published in the Journal of Human Evolution about two very interesting fossil primates, one from China and one from North America, and how they are intimately related and how one illuminates the evolutionary history of the other. Before I get into that, I would like to first acknowledge my home institution, the University of Kansas, that has allowed me to be able to pursue this research and supported me in doing so. The fellowship that has funded me and also supported me as I have been a graduate student conducting this research, and of course, my collaborators and colleagues. Science itself is a collaborative discipline, so I would not be able to be here to share with you this exciting research without them. So without any further ado, I have been studying primates and interested in exploring their evolutionary history, their origins for nearly a decade now. Primates are, this is a beautiful collage here of our living primate relatives. And I just love how, I'm going to get my laser pointer here. I love how this collage captures the beautiful diversity of our living primate relatives. And why should we study primates? Well, we are ourselves primates, Homo sapiens, and this is just a snapshot of some of our living primate relatives. And they're gorgeous, and I think they're fascinating to study. And unfortunately, a majority, I'd say 75%, if not more, of our non-human primate relatives are threatened with extinction. And that is due to a number of factors, but the most critical and pressing factor is habitat loss due to environmental and climatic change that is also fueled by human activity. So in order to conserve this beautiful biodiversity that we see in our living primate relatives, we have to understand their past. And the fossil record and paleontology as a discipline is our time machine to be able to observe essentially how extinct primates behaved and responded to past environmental and climatic changes. So this is our direct tool that we can interpret. We can read the fossil record of primates to better inform conservation efforts to preserve our living primate relatives today that are threatened with extinction from climatic and environmental changes. So before I get into the nitty gritty of our research, of the research that I'm presenting here to you today, I figured I would tell you a little bit about me, what my paleontological research agenda is, and a little bit of how I got here. And then I'm going to give a nice little primer of primates in the fossil record. I really want to set the scene, the who, what, when, where of the earliest primates and what the global landscape looked like when we first see primates in the fossil record. And then with that nice little primer on fossil primates, I'll get into the origin and biogeography, evolutionary history of Ekgmowechashala and how a newly named primate that my advisor and I named Palaeohodites really illuminates the origin of Ekgmowechashala, which is in North America, while Palaeohodites is in China. So a little bit about me. I pursued a master's at Hunter College as it was so lovely described in my introduction earlier. And this is where I really became infatuated, very interested in the earliest primates. It was human evolution in undergrad that I was really interested in. But as I pursued my master's degree, I realized how interesting and what complexities and unanswered questions there were about the earliest primates. So for my master's, I did research where I investigated the evolutionary relationships of another extinct group of primates called cephalodapids that are in Asia. And it was the first opportunity that I was exposed to fieldwork, which I know a lot of members in this society are very eager to conduct and participate in. And ever since that first fieldwork trip, I was hooked. Also, while I was pursuing my master's, I'm very passionate about science communication. And so I was able to, I was recruited as a scientific educator and public outreach scientific communicator at the American Museum of Natural History as I pursued my master's, which was really wonderful to engage with the community about the latest scientific research in paleoanthropology. And all of that ushered me to my current position today, where I am a PhD candidate in the Beard Lab at the University of Kansas. And while I study fossil primates, my colleagues in my lab, we're all mammalian paleontologists interested in the mammals that first evolved right after the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. And this is a nice little snapshot here of us just recently in Toronto at the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology annual meeting. And I have been able to participate and collaborate in a number of domestic and international field work initiatives with collaborators that has taken me to working in the Bison Basin of Southwest Wyoming, where my colleagues and I are collecting fossils of mammals from a late Paleocene site. And unlike, the big dinosaur excavations, we're looking for tiny little mammals. So this requires a lot of, we don't use tractors, we don't use any kind of big heavy machinery for large scale excavations. We're surface prospecting, honestly, typically on our bellies and hands and knees, looking for tiny little fossils, typically about this size. But we even pan for gold, essentially fossil gold, by collecting sediment from a site like this, packing it up, and then taking it to a nearby stream where we will literally pan for fossil gold, as we like to say, to find even tinier specimens than that. So this is some of our domestic fieldwork that we conduct in Wyoming. We also have Turkish and French collaborators in the Beard Lab. that are helping us conduct research, paleontological and geological research in central Anatolia of Turkey. And so we're looking in Middle Eocene rock formations for some really interesting mammals that originate and evolve there. And at this point in time, Turkey was an archipelago, not the continuous landscape that it is today. So we find really, really fascinating fossil mammals. So if you're into fossils and mammalian paleontology, be on the lookout for some cool papers from the Beard Lab, whether it's from Turkey or in Southwest Wyoming. So that's a little bit of my research agenda and where my graduate studies have taken me. I always figured some people want to know a little bit more about all of the research that students, graduate students, and young scientists are doing. And I'd like to think that my research agenda outside of the field work, but what do I do with the fossils when I get back to the lab? Well, I think that as a paleontologist, my research agenda is basically founded on two pillars: reconstructing evolutionary relationships and biogeography. So I am interested in phylogenetic reconstruction, which is just another way of saying I'm interested in studying and reconstructing how extinct species were evolved or were related to each other and to living organisms. So right here on the left, this is called a radial phylogeny, and you'll notice that there are pictures, little icons of living primates. So this is an evolutionary tree of living primates. And so this branching diagram depicts relationships. So the closer that two species are on this radial phylogeny at the ends, at the tips of these branches, the closer two branches are together, the more closely related those two species are, and because they share a more recent common ancestor. And the way that this radial phylogeny has been constructed is from using molecular data. So they sequence a bunch of genomes of these different primates and look at how similar or how different the molecular structure of their or the DNA sequences of these different primates are to build this evolutionary tree that depicts how species today are related to one another. Well, unfortunately, Jurassic Park kind of oversold the idea of how old DNA will preserve in the fossil record. So I think that at this point, the oldest viable DNA still to be extracted from fossils is from a Neanderthal that was like 400,000 years old. Maybe that's been pushed to the limit since then. But as a paleontologist that's interested in the origin of primates, unfortunately, I don't have DNA. So how am I reconstructing these evolutionary relationships? Well, as a paleontologist, I have to look at the anatomy, the morphology of these fossils, and how similar or dissimilar they are to infer and reconstruct these evolutionary relationships. And so not only am I interested in how these extinct fossil primates, adapoids, might be related to omamioids, which is another extinct group of primates. I'm also interested how they're related to living primates. And so it's important to understand and intimately know the primate anatomy of our living primate relatives in order to make those connections. So this is one major tenet of my paleontological research agenda: reconstructing these evolutionary relationships between extinct species and extinct and living species. And what's very interesting too is that understanding evolutionary relationships gives this really beautiful framework to understand the biogeography of extinct and living primates. So biogeography simply means the distribution of a clade or a group of organisms. So let's say primates. Primates, while they are restricted to tropical areas today and on certain land masses, they had a much different distribution over in deep time in the ancient past. And understanding evolutionary relationships can reciprocally inform how extinct primates traveled across time and space. That could help us to understand their modern day distributions as well, and also how they were dispersing across landscapes. Were they dispersing actively through land connections that were ephemeral but existent at the time? Or were they vicariant dispersals or dispersers, passive dispersers, maybe moving on land masses, um, major land masses that move during tectonic events? So I'm interested in these two main pillars. These are the two main pillars that really kind of inform my research and how we are unraveling and uncovering the earliest chapters of primate evolutionary history. So I've talked a little bit about primates and these major tenets. So how do I know what is a primate? If I'm looking for primates in the fossil record, what is a primate and how would I distinguish it from any other fossil mammal? Well, there are some important traits of modern primates that a lot of extinct primates also have, and we're able to see. First of all, forward-facing eyes is a unique trait that all primates have, rather than the laterally placed orbits of, for example, horses. And related to that, primates have this post-orbital bar or post-orbital plate that also protects, it has been hypothesized that protects the eye itself, because we have so heavily invested in our sight compared to other mammals. Primates are visually very dominant organisms. We also have, as primates, relatively large brain size to body size. We have grasping hands and feet. Actually, humans are the weird ones out of all the primates because we have evolved our big toe to be back in line with the rest of our toes. But grasping hands and feet are a really important trait of primates. And then primates also typically have a long gestation period, so with a lot of maternal care and investment. So of these, as a paleontologist, I'm limited also by what I can use and apply to the fossil record to help discern if the fossil I have found is a primate. And unfortunately, I don't have big, beautiful brain cases and skulls. I find fossils that are not perfectly preserved, but rather fragmentary. And insult to injury, some of these bones that are the most diagnostic to determine if it's a primate or not, like for example, the skull, where there are a lot more traits, are not perfectly preserved. So what am I to do? Well, luckily, as a mammalian paleontologist, I rely very heavily on studying the teeth of mammals and specifically primates. Unlike reptiles, mammals are unique in that we have teeth that are of different kinds. We have 4 different kinds of teeth. We have the front are spatulate incisors. We have a canine, that's a very conical pointed tooth. We have some premolars. These are called bicuspids if you ever want to talk shop with your dentist. And we also have molars. So we've evolved these complex sets of teeth to better masticate and evolve and expand our dietary regime. So for example, this is a really great diagram to show just how complex mammalian teeth are. And what's great about being a mammalian paleontologist is that teeth preserve out of anything else in the skeleton. Teeth preserve the best in the fossil record because of that hard coating of enamel that your dentist is always very worried about. So we have this hard coating of enamel that helps preserve our teeth. And by looking at the cusp morphology of some of these teeth, for example, the molars here, you're looking at the upper molars of Canalestes from the Cretaceous, you'll see that they have specific landmarks, anatomical landmarks, these crests and cusps. And so if you take your tongue and slide it on the chewing surface of your back teeth, you'll feel all those bumps and crests, and they all have a name, and they're all diagnostic. So if I can look at a tooth and say, whoa, the pericone here is actually a little bit more canted that way, these are traits that can help me determine and discern a primate from another mammal. And that's exactly what we do. So for example, you'll see here, Omomes is an early fossil primate, early Eocene fossil primate. And you'll notice how different the morphology of this early primate is to Canalestes, which is from the late Cretaceous, which isn't too far removed from when Omomes was alive as well. So Mammals have these unique sets, unique kinds of teeth. They're great and they preserve really well. And that's how we're able to identify a primate and discern species from one another. So let's start setting the scene of fossil primates. All right. So the earliest primates occur they come in two flavors, is what is typically taught. So the earliest primates appear roughly around uh, 10 million years after the extinction of the non-avian dinosaurs. And they come in these two flavors. You have the lemur-like adapiforms, and then you have these tarsier-like omamaiiforms. So tarsiers, I like to call them the pugs of the primate world. They have these really big eyes. They're very small. They have a short rostrum or snout. And then adapiforms are kind of like a lemur that you would see in the zoo today. They're a little bit larger in body size. But they have all of these features that make them a primate in their cranium, in their skeleton, grasping hands and feet, nails instead of claws. So these are the two groups of the first true primates that we find in the fossil record. They have all the traits that we would use to identify a primate today. So what does the world look like when the first primates are hanging out, when they're first evolving? Well, around 50 million years ago, so the first primates are said to have evolved around 55 to 50 million years ago. And this is essentially what the world looked like. The continents are not in their modern day positions, but you can see that they're getting kind of there. There is a large seaway, not yet the Mediterranean, but it's referred to as the Tethys Seaway, that is separating Africa from most of Eurasia or from most of Europe. Europe, and what I mentioned about Turkey, is still really a large archipelago that is also interrupting the continuous landmass, is the Obic or Turgai Seaway. And there are intermittent connections between North America and Asia, and India is starting to collide with Asia. So we've set the geographic scene. So where do primates first appear? Well, primates appear simultaneously, roughly, like I said, about 10 million years after the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs in North America, Europe, and Asia. So identifying exactly where they originated has still been up for debate, but if I had one nickel left in my bank account, I think I would say that the earliest primates, they originated likely in Asia. But at this point, primates appear simultaneously in the whole Arctic, in North America, Europe, and Asia. And during the Eocene, so this is around 55 to 35 million years ago. So here is time being displayed on this graphic right here. This period of time, this epoch, is called the Eocene, highlighted here in yellow. And it spans about 20 million years. And life during the Eocene was pretty grand for a lot of tropical warm weather dwelling mammals. And it's actually when we first start to see modern mammal groups evolve and radiate, not only primates, but we see all of a sudden we see crown and modern bats. We see a lot of horses. We see a lot of different mammals first originate during this time. And the warmer conditions of the Eocene, as you'll notice here, this is a graph showing paleo temperature and sea level estimated from ice cores and eustatic sea level foraminifera. We know that the early Eocene was a greenhouse essentially, and there was a warming event that preceded in the Paleocene and a slight dip in temperature, but life during the Eocene was very warm, so warm that primates that we understand live today closer to the equator in more tropical areas and warmer conditions were living as in really high latitudes, even as far as the Arctic Circle. So primates, while there are no lemurs living in the United States today, in the early Eocene, primates were thriving in these warm weather conditions in latitudes and regions in, and of course, you all know, even Canada and Montana, South Dakota, not where you would expect to find a primate today. So the Eocene was this warm, wonderful kind of tropical, lush rainforest. I love this paleo environmental reconstruction, this illustration. It shows a group of Cantius, which is a kind of early Eocene adapiform foraging in this laurel tree. And you have some Cryacus condylarths right here, and some early Hyracotherium horses down here that are being preyed on by a large bird. But life in the Eocene, even in high latitudes and regions like South Dakota, Montana, and Nebraska, it was a tropical, lush landscape that was really conducive for primates and these tropical kind of weather-loving primates to evolve and radiate. And so for about 20 million years, the United States, Europe, and Asia were really teeming with all of these earliest primates, the adapiforms and the oomyforms. And that was facilitated by this greenhouse kind of climatic effect. However, by the time of the Oligocene, so around 34 million years ago, this lush subtropical kind of landscape that dominated these higher latitude regions were replaced relatively abruptly by open grassland savannas. There was a climatic event that is known as the Eocene Oligocene transition, where there was a dramatic cooling event where ice sheets advanced and sea levels increased and temperatures decreased. So this is a dramatic and abrupt change in climate and environment, which had incredibly impactful effects on the fauna that dominated these landscapes at the time. And by the end of the Eocene, all primates in North America go extinct. So they radiated, evolved, and were thriving in North America, Europe, and Asia, all throughout the Eocene. And by the end of the Eocene, by the time of the Oligocene, all primates in North America and Europe go extinct, unable to adapt and overcome this environmental change. So now we've had a primer on primates and what's been going on. We know that the Eocene is a great time for a lot of different mammals. There's a lot of dispersal going on between North America and Asia, given these land connections. What goes on in the Oligocene? We know that there's some cooling, and we know that primates are absent from the fossil record by the Oligocene until this particular fossil was discovered from the Great Plains of North America, of the United States. And this is a fossil known as Ekgmowechashala. Ekgmowechashala randomly appears in the fossil record roughly 4 million years after the extinction of all primates in the region. Now, these fossil teeth, they're very funky. And as I told you, mammalian paleontologists really rely on teeth and the understanding the anatomy of the cusps and crests to diagnose species. That's how we distinguish primates from other mammals. Well, when these fossil teeth were discovered, they were highly contested. Some people even didn't think that, some researchers didn't even consider this species a primate. So Ekgmowechashala was first discovered in South Dakota in the 1960s. We're looking at the upper cheek teeth here of this taxon, of this species, and then the lower cheek teeth here. You'll notice that there's a lot of wrinkled enamel that's called crenulated enamel. They're big, puffy, bulbous cusps. These are some funky looking teeth, but they're reminiscent of some primates. And so ever since the 1960s, there was a leading hypothesis that Ekgmowechashala is likely an oomyform primate. a relic or a late survivor that we somehow missed in the fossil record from the earlier omamiids that were thriving in North America during the Eocene, because it randomly appears. But, and right here, this is a really nice scientific illustration or reconstruction of what Ekgmowechashala may have looked like, which I love. But a lot of people weren't pleased with that hypothesis. So we have this one hypothesis that this funky looking primate that randomly appears after the extinction of all primates in the region, 4 million years after their extinction, is likely an omamiiform. If you look at the upper cheek teeth here, you'll notice that there's some reminiscent morphology to here of Ekgmowechashala. So that was a hypothesis that was a leading hypothesis. Other researchers thought that given other aspects of its dental anatomy, that it looked or it may be allied with dermopterans, with plagiomenids, which are likely extinct kind of dermopterans. Dermopterans are living, they're not living primates today, but closely related. And they're also called flying lemurs. They're really fascinating creatures. So there was a school of thought that considered, well, maybe Ekgmowechashala isn't a primate and maybe it's this plagiomenid. And that would help solve the case of where did Ekgmowechashala come from? Is it even a primate? And then lastly, a hypothesis that garnered more recent support was maybe Ekgmowechashala is actually this lemur-like adapiform kind of primate, because there are some other fossil primates that look similar to it, but they're in Asia. So there was a lot of debate ever since its discovery in the 1960s of what is Ekgmowechashala and where did it come from and who would it likely be most closely related to. Ekgmowechashala was a big mystery because for the longest time, it evolved randomly, or it appeared quite randomly in the fossil record of North America, and it is isolated in time and space from no other possible relative. And these hypotheses weren't really getting us anywhere. So there was a big stall in trying to understand where Ekgmowechashala came from. And I should also mention that Ekgmowechashala was discovered by a researcher named MacDonald in the 1960s, and he named it Ekgmowechashala because it was first found in the Wounded Knee site here in South Dakota, where a lot of indigenous tribes are today still. And so Ekgmowechashala in the Sioux language translates to little cat man, because there was no such thing as a monkey in the Sioux language. So that's where the name Ekgmowechashala comes from. So, but there's been a lot of debate about where Ekgmowechashala came from, how it originated, how did it get to North America? Well, a lot of the debate kind of stalled, and then it wasn't until my advisor and some of his collaborators in the 90s were prospecting, doing some simple surface prospecting in some late Eocene deposits in Guangxi, China. So remember, Ekgmowechashala appears roughly 4 million years after the extinction of all primates in North America. And so that's roughly around 29 million years old, 29 to 30 million years old. This is a late Eocene locality, which is about 40 million years old or 38 million years old. And this is the fossil that my advisor discovered himself in the 90s here in Guangxi, China. You're looking at the upper molar of a mammal. Are there any striking, interesting features that you notice? Well, when my advisor first picked this fossil up in China in the 90s, he instantly recognized that it is strikingly similar to Ekgmowechashala. That is roughly 5 to 7 million years younger than what you're looking at in China. So it was an interesting biogeographic and evolutionary story. We've got these very similar looking mammals that are separated through time and space, but possibly closely related, giving this striking morphological similarity in their upper dentition. So this is the Chinese taxon that we ended up calling Palaeohodites. And here are the lower teeth. You're looking at scans, micro CT scans of the fossil that we scanned at Duke University. And they're part of our publication. They're really beautiful scans. And we wanted to formally test this hypothesis. And also, this upper molar that you're looking at was discovered just more recently, I think in the 80s in Nebraska. So there is a theme that, fossils are discovered and they have to reach peak vintage in the collections of museums until an interested, curious graduate student comes along to investigate them formally. So my advisor handed me these two fossils and said, let's test this hypothesis. We hypothesized, given the striking morphological similarity, that Ekgmowechashala is very closely related to this Chinese fossil, given and what we have interpreted as a duplicated protocone, which is this cusp right here. You see that it is in Palaeohodites, which is older. You see that there are two cusps right here that are twinned, that are strikingly similar to this that we see right here. In addition to several neomorphic cuspules, this is just accessory additional cusps that we see evolve on teeth, the crenulated enamel. The similarity is just striking. So we wanted to formally test this hypothesis using software to create and reconstruct evolutionary relationships based on anatomy. So in 2016, interestingly, my advisor and his Chinese collaborators were working on a totally different phylogenetic reconstruction of some different primates. But in their reconstruction, they found, looking at anatomical data and scoring the data for each species in their analysis, that Ekgmowechashala was nested, that is, was deeply couched in a group of most closely related species that all came from Asia. Now, so there was this idea that Ekgmowechashala has some maybe connections to Asia, and so our analysis on Ekgmowechashala and Palaeohodites actually confirmed that. So what we did here, so this is a 2016 publication that shows how Ekgmowechashala is nested in this group of adapiform primates, not omomaiform primates, and specifically extinct primates from Asia. So to further bolster this finding, we looked at our results from our phylogenetic analysis, where we assessed 42 different extinct adapiform species and looked at over 1,000 morphological characters. So we built this huge matrix with all of our species in one column and 1,000 morphological characters to look at, and we scored how similar or dissimilar each species was by each character that we looked at, by each anatomical character that composed this phylogenetic study. And we focused mostly on how similar or dissimilar species were in their dental anatomy. And we use these characters and we look at each species and we give them a score. And what this computer program does, it uses an algorithm and a model of evolution that we call parsimony, which is essentially the least amount. It's like Occam's razor. The easiest solution is the likely solution. So we infer, using a model of evolution under parsimony, that evolutionary relationships are constructed based on the path of least resistance. So this is the fewest amount of evolutionary steps. So we use this model of evolution and all of this anatomical data of the cranium, of the teeth, of any elements in the postcrania to then reconstruct this evolutionary, the evolutionary relationships of all of these extinct species. And as I mentioned earlier, the closer two species are, the more closely related they are. And we wanted to test this hypothesis. Is Ekgmowechashala closely related to this Chinese fossil that my advisor and his colleagues found? Well, our findings, and we did another phylogenetic analysis using a different model of evolution, unequivocally demonstrates that Ekgmowechashala is most closely related to, out of any other extinct primate, to Palaeohodites, to this Chinese taxon that my advisor and his Chinese collaborators discovered in the 90s. Additionally, we have more support for the fact that for this clade Ekgmowechashalids, this group of Asian and one North American primate that makes and composes a new clade of adapiform primates. So what does this tell us about Ekgmowechashala? Okay, Kat, you've told me that Ekgmowechashala is most closely related to this Chinese fossil, but how do you make sense of that? Well, let's go back to our landscape. In the early Eocene, here are some fossil primate localities. We see primates in North America, in Europe, and all over Asia. But then again, by the end of the Eocene, around 34 million years ago, during the Eocene-Oligocene transition, we see that none of the primates in North America nor Europe have survived this boundary. However, primates in Asia are able to adapt and overcome these environmental conditions. And I'll get into that here in a little bit. But we see that Palaeohodites is represented by this icon here in China, and the other Ekgmowechashalids species that we recovered in one most closely related group, Gadanthropus micros, Wangtanhinius, Bugti lemur. These taxa or these species are all living also in Asia around the same time. So it is likely, based on the close evolutionary relationship between Ekgmowechashala and the Chinese fossil, which we are calling Palaeohodites naduensis, Ekgmowechashala is likely or is an immigrant species from Asia that likely originated, first evolved, and then migrated and made its way via the ephemeral land connections to North America, especially as sea levels dropped and allowed for these land connections. And so this explains the isolation of Ekgmowechashala in the North American fossil record in terms of space and time. So we've put to bed the debate of where Ekgmowechashala came from. It is not a relic or a late surviving species of the earlier Neotharctid primates or Omamaiform primates that were thriving in North America during the Eocene, but rather it weathered a lot of harsh conditions in Asia to then make it eventually to North America via this this land connection here. And so it also demonstrates, our findings in this research also demonstrate what an important refuge Southern Asia actually served for Ekgmowechashala, or for Palaeohodites and the other Asian species in this group of extinct primates, Ekgmowechashalids, because it demonstrates how primates were able to retreat to lower latitudes in times of intense environmental and climatic changes. Rather than going extinct, they were able to retreat to lower latitudes to get to warmer, better, more hospitable conditions. So it really marks the importance of habitat availability in the face of climate and environmental changes. Moreover, the interesting and unique dental anatomy of Palaeohodites here, excuse me, it is likely that the big puffy bulbous cusps, the thick and crenulated enamel, was an adaptation to a diet of really hard food items. So crenulated enamel and this kind of cusp morphology has been interpreted to be conducive for a diet that is mostly comprised of hard food objects. So think about really hard seeds or nuts or even tubers. So thinking about this environmental change that's going on between the Eocene and the Oligocene, it's getting colder. Maybe the diet, the food resources that primates were once so dependent on, other primates that were dependent on fruits were not able to find that in the Oligocene, and so they weren't able to access that resource and faced extinction. Palaeohodites, on the other hand, which gave rise likely to Ekgmowechashala, had this dental anatomy that allowed it, that naturally allowed it to survive these conditions better than other primates. So that's why we see the survival of not only Palaeohodites, but Ekgmowechashala all the way into the Oligocene, which is a really cool way to evaluate, understand evolutionary history of primates, of Ekgmowechashala, and put to bed this debate of where Ekgmowechashala came from. And then lastly, I just wanted to point out that technically Ekgmowechashala is considered a Lazarus taxon. So what is Lazarus? Well, we get it. The Lazarus effect in biology is taken from the biblical reference, raising from the dead. And it's a term used to identify or used to describe species that were once thought long to be extinct in an area, but then magically reappear. We see it with coelacanths. We've seen it with a number of different, even rodents in Laos recently. But for the rank of primates, primates go extinct in the North American fossil record until the resurgence or the revival of primates in North America by Ekgmowechashala. So Ekgmowechashala has this very unique and cool title of being the last primate before the arrival of Homo sapiens. And it's also a fascinating fossil to tell us how extinct primates responded to and responded to abrupt climatic changes. So with that, I realize I have taken a lot of time here. I thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions at this point. Any questions at all?
Hello?
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I've got a question. Actually a couple.
Sure.
I'm gonna call him Ekmo. Is Ekmo
Yeah.
last primate in North America?
It is considered the last primate in North America before the arrival of Homo sapiens around 12,000 years ago.
Right, okay. Another thing, future work. Are you gonna try to trace this back toward Asia? Like, are there any, I don't know, maybe there aren't any Oligocene rocks between South Dakota and Alaska that you can look at?
So I would be very actually interested in getting into if I would, if in my picture perfect world, I'd be able to go all the way from China and trace to see if there were Oligocene rock formations to try and trace the route that Ekgmowechashala took. And it just is, you're exactly right. It is an absence of Oligocene rocks and the places that we would be honed in on to try and look for Ekgmowechashalids. But the other areas of the Great Plains, and in fact, Ekgmowechashala is now as a genus represented by two distinct species, one from the proper Great Plains of Nebraska and South Dakota, and then there's Ekgmowechashala zanconnelli that is slightly younger from Oregon. And so if we're able to find more from the Great Plains, that would really further kind of elucidate the direct route that Ekgmowechashala likely took from Asia.
Right. I'm thinking, yeah, I think there's some Oligocene rocks on Vancouver Island, but I think they're marine, so it's probably no good for you. Anyway, thank you.
I know this is, of course, that is the plight of being a paleontologist. You get what you get and you don't get upset, whether it's fossils or rock formations. So I see that there's another question in the chat. Were the Plesiadapiforms primates? They were around during the Paleocene. Yes, Plesiadapiforms are around during the Paleocene. And if they are primates, the answer to that question depends on who you talk to. There are two competing, or maybe three competing schools of thought that couches Plesiadapiforms within primates, so they're considered primates, but not euprimates. Another competing hypothesis is that Plesiadapiforms are not as closely related to primates. In fact, that their stem, or they're more closely relating to flying colgos, so Dermopterans. So that the answer to that question gets a little tricky depending on who you talk to. But Plesiadapiforms were very successful, where it was a very successful clade of primate-like mammals during the Paleocene. And I found, in fact, actually the one picture that I zoomed in on, I believe that was a Plesiadapiform from the Basin Basin, a late Paleocene locality that we collect from. So yeah. Any other questions? When primates immigrated to Central and South America by rafting, why did they not go to North to repopulate North America? That's an excellent question. And so, yes, this gets into a really cool concept that seems almost unbelievable and miraculous in primate evolutionary history. How did the monkeys in South America get there? And before, there's a lot of different competing schools of thoughts. In the early 20th century, William Diller Matthew was a prevailing paleontologist at the American Museum of Natural History and could not fathom the idea of rafting, but then suggested that primates from Eurasia and Africa likely dispersed across landscapes into North America and then going into South America. However, there's no trace of any other primate taking that direction. And we don't find, Ekgmowechashala is the only primate that we find in North America. Whereas in the Eocene, you do find, or in the late Eocene, you do find some primates in South America. And so, yes, it is likely, and based on molecular data and paleontological data, the fossils and primates that are currently in South America are most closely related to those in Africa. And so they did, in fact, it's likely, given the timing of their appearance in the South American fossil record and the phylogenetic, again, this is biogeography and evolutionary relationships, reconstructed evolutionary relationships can uncover evolutionary history of organisms. So based on these two lines of evidence, we understand it is likely that they did raft across the Atlantic, which has been calculated to only take like 40 something days, and people have recalculated or reconstructed the ocean currents of the Eocene during this time, when this miraculous journey had to have occurred in order for monkeys from Africa to actually get into South America. But as to why they didn't go up to North America, at that point in time, I don't believe that South America and North America were actually connected. There were only really small, like there weren't really many land bridges until much later in time. So that's my understanding of it. So yes, if anyone is interested in this kind of question, there is a really great book. It's called The Monkey's Voyage, and it is talking about miraculous biogeographical feats of different lineages, primates, plants, other mammals, to explain how the modern distribution, if organisms were actively dispersing and how they were dispersing, or were they moving along major land masses and during tectonic events. So what's the size? Okay, yes, that's another great question. So another question, what's the size of the teeth of these primate critters? They're quite small. And in fact, so I believe that the distance, so we're looking at the upper tooth here. So this is an upper tooth, and this is the cheek side, and this is the tongue side. So I believe from the cheek side to the tongue side is no more than 3 millimeters. So these are tiny, tiny fossils. And that's why we are most often scouring the landscape like this, looking at the ground. So, I mean, right up like hands and knees on our bellies, inches away from the ground, trying to look for these super tiny fossils. So yeah, they're quite small. So they are similar in size to modern day primates, but there are only a few modern day primates that are that small. There are a lot of small lemur, like mouse lemurs and bush babies that would be about that size. And that's what's also great about we use the modern analogs to not only estimate body mass, but maybe what they could have looked like as well, which is why this paleoartistic reconstruction is so cute. So yeah. Any other questions? Okay.
I think silence of longer than 10 to 15 seconds means that no more questions. Awesome. Kathleen, thank you so much. That was really fascinating, actually.
Oh, great, good.
Yeah, we I don't know. For our talks, we've done a lot of like paleontology, dinosaurs. So it's nice to kind of touch with some ancestors of the primates. So yeah,
Yeah, I
really
know
interesting.
the dinosaurs get a lot of get the limelight, but fossil mammals are pretty cool too.
Exactly. Yeah, they sure are. Just a quick kind of follow-up. So would you consider like those teeth microfossils?
Yes, most definitely. They are considered microfossils to, yeah. These are very small. I
Yeah.
have nightmares of dropping them on the floor in the lab, but we have a
Or
very
walking around with a magnifying glass.
exactly, yeah, exactly. They're tiny. So, yep.
Well, right. Well, thank you again. And you picked the new t-shirt. We have an updated logo, so we'll make sure to get that sent to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you again
Yeah.
for your attention, time, and letting me get to talk about primates and Ekgmowechashala and Palaeohodites. I love talking about it and sharing this research with you all. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much as well. If anyone does have any potential further questions, they can reach out to you.
Sure, certainly. You can find my email is k.rust@ku.edu. And my lab mate is in the process of currently updating our out of date and paused lab website. So I'd be happy to share that with you once that is published. So you can check out some of the other recent publications that are coming out of our lab. I'm the primate gal in our lab, but my lab mate, Kristen, she studies marsupials. We had another student who's now doing a postdoc at ASU that studied bats. So we're a diverse mammal group, mammalian paleontology group. So yes, I'd be happy to share all of that with you.
Awesome. Well, I'm definitely going to be staying tuned to what you have coming up next. So
Wonderful, wonderful.
awesome.
Well, thank you all so much.
Yeah. And I guess you can Yep, stop sharing your screen. Perfect.
All
And
right.
that, I believe, wraps up our meeting today. So
Thanks all.
yes, thank you. And everyone have a lovely evening. Stay warm. Hopefully you're warm in Kansas. We're in the -20s. So
Oh, we're getting down to -4
okay.
tomorrow. So we're pretty cold, but not y'all the professionals when it comes to that. Okay, take
All right,
care.
take
Thanks
care.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.